Always fun to show up, Mogul. Nothing like being in a room full of people who are really interested in being there. You know, it's terrible being places where people are dragged and they don't, and they're not interested, and somebody told them should. But you know, here at Mogul, everybody's really interested in real estate. So I'm always happy to show up and present. So we're going to talk today about this thing called agreements for sale, abbreviated as AFS. And as Devin mentioned, I do a lot on the creative real estate side of things. And by creative, we mean strategies that are other than the basic buy and hold, for instance. So firstly, we love buy and hold. Donna and I, my wife and I, Donna, own, I think we still have 22 doors that are buy and hold doors. So buy and hold is probably the cornerstone of everybody's portfolio. The creative side, agreements for sale, rent to own, fix and flip, wholesaling, joint ventures as they apply to all those things, is kind of the supplementary tool. It's creative strategies are extremely useful for you for various reasons. You run out of money, but real estate's a big, broad canvas. It's a big, broad canvas, and where buy and hold might form the majority of people's interests in portfolios. What we like to teach and what we like to say is, if you understand the strategies, you'll recognize the opportunities. And it's been, I can tell you, it's been a revelation to our students, where they show up to hear about something that they have no idea of, and their eyes get all big and they go, oh my God. In our marketing, we've been throwing away all of these opportunities that we now understand because we had no idea what they were. So that's one of the big things that I like about showing up at Mogul, and the Mogul guys and girls are one of the few groups of realtors that actually understand creative strategies. Most realtors only deal in buy and hold. The Mogul group understand the creative side, and I've helped them put together any number of creative deals. So with that as kind of an intro, let's talk about this thing called the agreement for sale. It's not an agreement of purchase and sale. It's an agreement for sale. And those words have specific legal meaning. I'm not using, this is Donna coaching me on the sidelines. You go, Barry, what about those PowerPoints? How come you're not using them? All right, fine. We'll use some PowerPoints. I got to use a down arrow because that's too sensitive. So some people go, you know, that's just a big pain. I think agreements for sale are a solution. What are they? What are they? At their essence, an agreement for sale is seller financing. The seller is your bank. That's the nub of it. Remember that. An agreement for sale is seller financing. And that can be very important for lots of people, which we'll find out as we work our way through the presentation. So it's different than a purchase and a mortgage. Got an extra slide here, don't I? And here's the big difference. If you buy a property from a seller by way of agreement for sale, title remains in the seller's name. Title remains in the seller's name. And if you're asking a seller to be your bank, they're very comforted by the notion that title is staying in their name. But just because title's in the seller's name doesn't mean you don't have an interest in the property. You do. When you buy by way of agreement for sale, you have the 100% beneficial interest. If the seller has a mortgage, he continues to make his own mortgage payments if he has them. And say it again, the seller is your bank. So really, at its heart, and I keep saying it because it's important to understand this, that an agreement for sale and AFS is seller financing. So let's go through some scenarios, because I'm yakking away here and people are going, yeah, Barry, but what does that really mean? So we've got three scenarios. And in the scenario is always going to be that the seller has a property for sale for $400,000 and you have only $25,000. That's what you've got, $25,000. And so in this case, the seller says, you know, I mean, you convinced the seller for various reasons that he should be your bank, and you write up an agreement for sale like this. You put down a deposit of $25,000 and you owe the seller $375,000. You and the seller negotiate on how you're going to pay him back the $375,000. And it's going to be interest only. Is it going to be a specific interest rate? How long is the term going to be? But when you write up the deal, you're only putting up $25,000 and he's carrying $75,000. Now, I like to put the brick wall between the seller and what his situation is, and the seller and you, and what you're doing with the seller. So in scenario number one, the seller has a clear title. He doesn't even have a mortgage, lucky guy. But he's ready to sell for you, and he's happy to take $25,000, and he's your bank for $75,000 with terms to be negotiated. So that's scenario one. Seller has clear title. Seller number two, or scenario number two. In this case, the seller has a $100,000 mortgage, but it's still the same setup. He wants $100,000. You only have $25,000. You write it up the same way. On you and the seller side of the brick wall, it's going to be the same all the time. You still only have $25,000. The seller is still your bank for $375,000, and you negotiate with the seller on how you're going to pay him back. On the other side of the brick wall, where before the seller had a clear title, now he has a $100,000 mortgage. So on your side of the wall, you have to make the seller a payment based on $375,000. The seller takes the payment that you make him. He pays whatever payment he has to make on his own $100,000 mortgage, and he puts the rest of the money in his pocket. Now, in a scenario like this, the seller might have a mortgage where his mortgage rate is, say, 2%. But, you know, because he's being your bank and because he's going to drive a bit of a harder bargain, maybe the interest rate to you is going to be 4%. So the seller is going to be getting a really nice payment from you based on a 4% interest rate on $375,000. And when that payment comes across the brick wall to the seller, he's got a tiny little payment to make on his $100,000 mortgage at 2%. But the setup's the same. You're paying $400, you've got $25,000, the seller's your bank for $375. Scenario number three. Have we seen these figures before, folks? Yes, we have. It's our same scenario where you have 25 and the seller wants 400. He's your bank for 375,000. We write it up the same way. Now, by the way, when you write up these kinds of agreements for sale, you use a standard MLS purchase contract, the one that James and his gang use all the time, and a one-page financing schedule. And that financing schedule is the one that sets out terms of the financing deal with the seller. The interest rate, what is the term? In other words, what's the maturity date? Can you pay back? What's your monthly payment? Is there balloon payments? All of the, all of the details around the loan are in your one-page financing schedule. But as you can see, it's the same setup as it was in the first two scenarios. You only have $25,000, and yes, he'll be your bank for $375,000. Okay, there's our brick wall again. Now, in this case, the seller has a $375,000 mortgage already, and he's lending you $375,000. For this kind of agreement for sale, almost always, your deal with the seller when he is your bank is the same as the seller's deal with his mortgage company. So if the seller's paying 2.5%, typically on your side of the brick wall, you're going to be paying 2.5%. And so the loan from the seller to you in this case mirrors the term of his underlying mortgage. Doesn't have to, because we've already seen the other two scenarios, but it just seems to make more sense. And it's an easier thing to negotiate with a seller who has a $375,000 mortgage to just make exactly the same payment to him that he's going to have to make to his bank. So that is a little bit of background for you on how an agreement for sale can work, where the seller has a clear title, where he has a smaller mortgage, or where he has a mortgage that's equal to the amount he's lending you. The one we see most is the one where the seller's loan is in this scenario, where the seller's mortgage is about the same as the seller's loan. And that's because an agreement for sale works best in a flat to negative market. Let's see what else we've got. It does work in any market, but it works best in a flat to depressed market. And we're going to see a little later on why that is so. In the flat to depressed market, you have lots and lots of deals where the seller's mortgage is close to the value of the property. When we say it works in any market, let's move off to Ontario, for instance, or the Lower Mainland in BC, where there's a lot of competition for properties, where prices are rising rapidly, where a property gets listed and, you know, in the first couple of days, there's 20 offers. So in a case like that, does the seller want to be your bank when people are just breaking down his door to buy his house at $400,000 over list price? No, most sellers just want their money in a hot market. They want their money. They don't have to be your bank, and they typically don't listen to you unless, when would they listen to you in a hot market? They listen to you sometimes if the price that their realtor tells them they can get now is smaller than a price they could have gotten 6 months ago. It's kind of odd psychology, but sellers often believe that if the property was once worth $1 value, then it's still always worth that dollar value, even if the market has fallen. So if you can manage to give the seller what he wants, which is his price, and if you can buy the property at that price and make it work for you, then that is a way to convince a seller in a hotter market to be your bank. Doesn't come up very often. Another scenario there is where the seller has a lot of equity in his property and he doesn't really know what he's going to do with his money, except he's choked that if he puts it in the bank, he's going to get a tiny little percentage, maybe not even 1%. If he puts his money in the bank, where you can say to him, listen, I'm a reliable person and I will pay you a 3.5% interest rate, which is probably 3% more than you can get in the bank. So that's another scenario where in a hotter market, sometimes a seller will talk to you. You know, it has to be a purchase that works for you. So that's some scenarios there. All right. So in the chat, or sorry, in the networking break, I had some questions about, you know, why is an AFS attractive to sellers? So if we look at the most common scenario in flat to negative markets is where the seller has low equity or perhaps no equity, low equity or no equity. So let's use our $400,000 example here. Say the seller bought his property for $400,000, and he put on an insured mortgage, a CMHC insured mortgage, 5% down. That makes a $380,000 mortgage on a $400,000 purchase, plus his CMHC insurance fee, which is typically 4% of the value of the property. So that would be another sort of 16,000. So when that seller bought for 400 grand, he put on a mortgage of $396,000. The market drops a little bit. The market drops 5%. The $400,000 property is now worth $380,000. And let's say his mortgage has dropped to, I don't know, let's say $390,000. When that seller goes to talk to a realtor and says, okay, you know what, I'm getting transferred or I'm getting divorced, I've got to sell my property. The realtor goes, you know, you do understand that I'm a realtor and I get paid commission for selling. And the commission on a $400,000 purchase is, let me see, 7,000 and then 3% of 9,000, $16,000. So that's the realtor commission. And if the seller has a fixed term mortgage that needs to be paid out, there could easily be another $10,000 in payout penalties. So the realtor says, hear what you're saying, you got to sell your house, but the market value is 380, your mortgage is 390, and between commission and payout penalties, that's another $25,000. You're going to have to write a big check to sell your house. So if you can offer a seller a circumstance where he doesn't have payout penalties, or where sometimes he doesn't have to pay commission, and in a room full of realtors with the Mogul people, we don't like to talk about cutting realtors out of their commission because that, not fair. Also, what else are sellers worried about? If their property is underwater, if they know that the mortgage is worth more than the house, they're going, uh-oh, what if I get foreclosed on? It's going to ruin my credit. And any mortgage broker or credit grantor will tell you that a foreclosure absolutely ruins someone's credit for a substantial number of years. Also, sellers feel that big financial burden around on their shoulders. If instead the market of going down, the market was up and his property's worth 410, he's not feeling as bad. The market's going in the right direction. But if it's a flat to negative market, they're stressed. Sellers are stressed. They get to the point where they just want out. They really don't care what happens as long as they can get out of the property. They've given up the notion of getting any money. And so what you do for them is you show them an exit to a terrible situation that they're in. They can't figure out how to get out of it. Their regular realtor can't help them. And it's a win for a seller if you can show them an exit to this example that I just went through. And it's a win for you. So where you might have bought it and it was a win for you, but a lose for the seller, what you've done is taken away the stress, showed him an exit where he didn't have one, and replaced win-lose with win-win. So those are all incentives and reasons why and how you can talk to a seller who's in a low or no equity situation. So let's do a little case study so you can see how these work sometimes. So one of our students, Dawn, my wife Dawn and I teach focus workshops where we go over these creative strategies, and we have home study kits available. And one of our students, after taking the course, did a Kijiji ad, and he had a lady respond. Turns out she's a bit older, almost near retirement age, had a half duplex, and she lost her job. And that, of course, if you don't have a job and no income, you start to be in tough shape. She had major health problems, and because she didn't have a job, how was she living? She was living on her credit cards. When our student got a look at the title, she had not one, but two mortgages, and with B lenders. B lenders are those lenders who, we're not talking TD and Royal Bank here. We're probably not even talking, the arms of, say, Canadian Western Bank. They're optimum mortgages. We're talking maybe more the private lenders or the Primerica lenders. She was paying big interest rates on two mortgages, and of course she was behind in those and 30 days away from foreclosure. It wasn't too far behind, but she was behind. Property was worth about $325, mortgaging of $300. She tried to sell with a realtor, but it didn't work. Even though she had a little bit of equity here and could have made some payments, they just couldn't sell it, and foreclosure is on the way. She wanted enough cash to move and pay some bills, and so she asked our student for $8,000 in cash, and that's kind of where they were negotiating around. Now she's worried about what our student is saying to her, because he was new and he talked about agreements for sale using that word, and instead of using the coaching that we like to give to our students about how to explain these concepts without making people crazy, he was trying to give a little too much detail, but that's because he was just starting. So she was a little edgy about what our student was offering to buy by way of agreement for sale. However, he was a really nice guy. He didn't rush her. He gave her all the information she wanted, told her of course, you can go talk to your lawyer. You do whatever you think you need to do. And this lady went to talk to her lawyer, who said, I'm not recommending that. I'm completely opposed to that. And in the end, refused to act for the lady seller. Didn't want to act for it. However, enough trust had been built up that the seller went ahead with our student anyway and sold him the house. Kind of did it on her own and just took the leap. So what did we end up with here? The rent analysis said the property would cash flow. So in the end, our student bought by way of agreement for sale for $305,000. $305,000. So he had to put up really $5,000 cash, and the seller lent him the balance of the price of $300,000, and the terms of the $300,000 were exactly the terms of the underlying two mortgages. Now remember, this property was worth, everyone agreed it was worth $325,000, $325,000. So our student gets instant equity of $20,000. And I can hear people thinking, that's crazy. Come on. If it's worth $325,000, who's going to sell for $305,000? I mean, that just doesn't happen. Well, folks, it does happen, and it happens a lot. This is a lady who had no other way out. She had big mortgages. She was going to be foreclosed on. Her credit cards were over leveraged. She couldn't sell with a realtor. She needed enough money to get into a little apartment and pay some bills, and nobody else was helping her. So it turns out to be, she thought a win-win, and our student thought a win-win. So that's how we closed the deal. Bought for $305,000 with $5,000 cash. Exit. When you buy properties, when you buy investment properties, James and the rest of the Mogul crew will say you have to consider what your exit is. In this case, the exit was, as soon as our student had control of the property, he found a rent-to-own tenant who had $6,000 worth of upfront option money. The rent for the place was $1,575, which paid all the taxes, and also included $400 a month additional option money for a 2-year term. So that's how that property was purchased. And I know, because I'm still working for this student, my client, I know that he's renegotiated his agreement for sale for another 2-year term because his rent-to-own tenant wasn't able to buy at the end of 2 years. And so he negotiated with the seller for another 2-year term. But don't you think that's a nice acquisition? And you note the seller was his bank for $300,000. All right, and agreements for sale are an old strategy, and they were in use long ago because it was hard to get a loan from a bank. It's kind of the same reason now. Financing is tough if you bought a couple of properties. And in Alberta, anyway, we're in a flat to falling market. So an AFS works best in a flat to falling market. So it's good in Alberta, probably pretty good in Saskatchewan. Some places in BC, not so good in hot markets. What kind of seller problems can you solve? So we've talked about some of this. If they don't have any equity and sellers have to sell because they're getting divorced or losing their job or getting transferred somewhere, and the property's underwater and they're facing those big payout and penalties, what are they going to do? I mean, what are they going to do? They can let the property go back to the bank, and somebody like Danielle will take it away from them and ruin their credit. Danielle's the meanie in this crowd. Wait till I get to work tomorrow. She's going to kill me. But, you know, an agreement for sale can be a solution in all those things. So what else does it do for sellers? If you own a property and you want to sell it, we've been talking mostly about buyers now, but if you own a property and you want to sell it and you're having trouble selling it, an agreement for sale, an AFS, can help you out, because if you're ready to be the bank, there's lots more people who want to buy your property when you're ready to be the bank. As well, if you like what you've made in terms of capital appreciation, your property's gone up. When you sell it, you've locked in your gain, and you've turned over to the buyer all the normal ownership costs. They have to do all the upkeep and pay for the utilities. You don't have any more property management fees. You don't have to pay realtor commission. Sorry, moguls. And you can charge a premium interest rate. Like I said, if AFS buyers are prepared to pay a little bit more in interest if the property will work for them, which sellers love. So this side of the discussion for AFS is where it's good for sellers as opposed to good for buyers. It's good for buyers and for sellers. Remember, you end up eliminating payout penalties, preserving credit. You get rid of that millstone of the financial burden and help a seller who wants to get out and provide an exit where none existed. I'm telling you folks, when you show up and a seller is in this circumstance, when they have that low equity, no equity circumstance, and you come up and say, I hear what you're saying. I understand exactly how the numbers work and that you lost your job or you're getting divorced and you need a solution to this. How would it be? How would this work for you if I took over your mortgage payments and taxes and insurance and all the maintenance on the property? Would that work? And that's how you say it to a seller. Seller's going, really? Can you say that again to me? Hold on here. So this is why you're providing great solutions for sellers. Now, what about the buyer side? What about the buyer side? Yes, there's all those reasons why you can help a seller, but on the buyer side, why are you interested in agreements for sale? Well, you can't qualify for a mortgage, or you've qualified for so many you can't qualify for any more. Or lots of buyers don't have any money to put down, or they have little money down. So if you can't qualify for the mortgage, and if you're short of money, an AFS can be good for you, including, I'm not going to give you an example tonight, I've done any number of deals where the seller wrote a check to the buyer. So not only are there circumstances where you don't need very much money, you might even get a check. So let's not get too carried away with that, though. Those deals are few and far between, but they do come up. Again, AFS is a solution to all this. So as a buyer, for you, the upside of AFS is you didn't have to qualify for a mortgage. You didn't have to put up very much money. You now control the property. You've got lots of exits, and you fixed the seller problem, turning the problem into a win-win. Do I have time for one more example, you mogul guys? Can I just carry on? Okay, you're not telling me no, so I'm going to carry on.
Do it.
Okay. All right. Here's an example. So we had a student who bought a property, did a renovation, according to his realtors, who were very plugged in. After the renovation was done, the property was worth $440,000. But in hotter markets, as you probably know, banks always want an appraisal, an official certified appraisal. Almost always they want that. Appraisals kind of lag behind what the market value is. And so when he went to the bank said, oh, we think it's worth 410. Fine, we don't like that. We think it's worth 440, but nevertheless, we've got to put a mortgage on it. So we got a mortgage on it, 80% of $410,000, $331,000 at 2.9. That was enough money to pay the acquisition costs and pay the rental costs. So now we have a property that's the bank value is at 410 with a $331,000 mortgage on it. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? Well, here's what our student did. You're going to love this. Now, there's a CMA for, it's a certified market analysis that realtors do. And it was 440, what was it there? Let me go backwards. Oh, sorry. $440,000. Now it's popped up a little bit. It's worth around $448,000. And so our student sold it by way of AFS for $448,000. He got cash up front of $38,000 and he carried just, guess what? He carried $410,000. 448 minus 38 is $410. The buyer was ready to pay him a little bit of a premium on the interest, 3.7. And here's how it worked out. Total profit is $116,000, $38,000 now, $78,000 profit coming in 2 years when the AFS is due and when the buyer had to pay off, Plus he was getting $500 a month positive cash flow. How sweet is that? So that is a way to structure a property that you already own to get a bit more value out of it when appraisals are falling behind actual today's market values. So in this case, the seller got his price and earned money on the interest rate spread, and the buyer got financing and positive cash flow. So that's another really good example of how an AFS works. Everybody's saying, so Barry, this is like Penn and Teller in Las Vegas. These are magic. Well, they're not magic. They're not magic. They don't come up every day. You got to know your chops and understand how to put them together. They are more work to put together, folks. There's no doubt about that. Not that many people know about them. Sellers, lawyers, realtors, lenders. You can say, I want to do an AFS, and a lot of people go, huh? So you definitely need to work with realtors like the Mogul gang who understand AFS. Work with mortgage brokers like, Dan Heon and Sean Impey and Keaton and Scott with KB Mortgages in Vancouver. They all understand how an AFS works. There's other things to work your way around, but really all these problems are solvable problems, and they really are worth the extra work. We have students who have taken our courses doing AFS deals now. The Mogul gang have clients who have purchased. They have sellers who are interested in selling by way of agreement for sale. Like I say, they're not on every street corner. Buy and hold is probably the strategy that most people want to stick with and do most of their things with. But if you understand how an agreement for sale works, and somebody, your mate where at your job says, oh my God, I never should have bought that house. You say, why? And he says, it's underwater and my wife is leaving me. And what the hell am I going to do? You can ask a few more questions, and then you can go, would it work for you if I took over your mortgage, taxes, insurance, and all the maintenance on the property? Your workmate looks at you and goes, really? I'm telling you, it works. So really, Don and I teach this in our courses lots. We play for win-win. I mean, we're looking to find solutions for people, not to beat people up, not to take advantage of them. And so we think that with an agreement for sale and some of the other creative strategies, you can really replace a win-lose situation with a win-win. As I said, it's more than just those distressed sellers. There's lots of other opportunities for it. As you get into it and learn how it works, you can listen for those opportunities. And as we say, if you understand the strategy, you will recognize the opportunity for sure. So we do right now have home study kits on agreements for sale, rent to own, wholesaling, much more. There's a link in the chat if you want to look at some of those kinds of things.